Okay, so we are talking about marketing tips for small practices. That's what BOSP have asked for today, 10 tips. And that's the perfect brief, I think, because I love giving marketing tips and stuff that small practices can implement and do something with. We're not going to be too high level, going to be looking across a bunch of different areas: website, media, social media, all that sort of thing. And yeah, let's get into it. So, just a couple of things about me. I'm Dave Sharp. I'm a marketing coach and strategist for architecture practices. I graduated from UWA and from architecture. I'm based in Melbourne at the moment for the time being, but I work with clients all over the place, all over the world. Over the last 6 years, I've worked with about 100 practices, medium, small, large, and working on marketing strategy and all of these different areas. And I also have a podcast called the Architecture Firm Marketing Podcast. It's very niche, but I think it's pretty good. I do some good interviews with some really cool architects, so that's definitely one to check out if you haven't heard of that one before. So let's get into the tips. Firstly, starting with probably one of the most basic ones, which is actually figuring out your marketing budget. This is something that I don't see many small practices having spent much time thinking about, and they're not sure what sorts of things to put in there or how much they should be spending or where they should be allocating different amounts of money. So one of the first things that I would do would start work on that. And I actually have a marketing budget calculator available on my website. If you go to the resources section at vanityprojects.com, you can check that out. And it covers all of the different areas that a small practice would need to spend money on. And I've just mapped out a really sort of very basic marketing budget for, say, like a 300,000 turnover practice. And these numbers might seem huge or they might seem small. It is what it is. But you might be looking at something like a few photograph projects, maybe $4,500 each on photography. A rendered project at a similar amount, and we're going to talk about those areas in a little bit. You'd probably want to spend a few $100s a month on social media advertising. That's probably best bang for your buck. I'm going to put in $400 a month on consultants, because why not include myself in your budget? $1,500 on awards entries, a couple $100s on miscellaneous things. And then I also think it would be a good idea for a practice at this size to also put a bit of a chunk aside for copywriting, for project descriptions and the website as well. So if you were looking at that sort of thing, it would come to about 30 grand or roughly 10% of turnover. And that's like pretty typical of what I would see as a pretty healthy little budget there. But the point that I wanted to make, and this is almost a tip in and of itself, is a mistake I see small practices making is that they try and spread their budget too thinly across too many different areas. So they want to do photography, they want to do awards, they want to do some ads or whatever, but they also want to pay somebody for SEO, and they also want to get a new website built, and they also want to do some big expensive print project, and they just want to do so many things that the way they end up doing it is cutting back within each of these areas and going for a much lower quality option. So a cheaper copywriter, a cheaper photographer, a cheaper visualization studio, and you end up throwing quite a lot of money down the drain that way. So what I usually recommend is try to concentrate your budget on a few areas and really spend the money on working with the best people in that area, and then save those other things that you want to do for later on down the track once you're in a position with your business where you feel comfortable starting to expand that budget a little bit. So now we're spending the money. First place to spend money, I think, ever is working with the best architectural photographers. It's one of the most challenging things to do early on in your practice, but it pays off over the long term in a really, really big way. And it's when a practice approaches me for marketing advice, the first thing that I see as a big promising sign is that they've hired the right people to shoot their projects. So I did a little bit of a study of every single article in the architecture media in print between February 2019 and 2022. And this is it broken down by state. In WA, we're kind of punching a little bit below our weight. We're not getting featured to the same extent that we should be in terms of the amount of coverage that we're getting as a state in the architecture media. And the editors know it too. They are so tired of putting in another like Melbourne project. They are desperate for Western Australian architecture. They want to see more of it. And so I think there are really big advantages to being a small West Australian practice, but you have to do the photography element right. So that's something that we definitely can see improvement around, but we'll get to media a little bit further on. In terms of that study and the photographers who shot the projects from WA that were published in print, I'm not necessarily endorsing these photographers, but these are the top 5 that sort of floated to the top in terms of track record of published projects just during that period. Jack Lovell, Rob Frith, Ben Hosking, Dion Robeson, Bo Wong. Ben's obviously not in WA. I think he's from Melbourne, but people fly him over. But those would just be some options initially that I would maybe consider having a look at. Now, I can't speak to pricing around photography for those specific photographers, but amongst my clients, a typical amount to spend on a say a residential shoot would be between $3,500 and $6,000 per project. So that is a pretty big chunky investment. But as I was saying earlier, I think if you want to set up a proper budget for that for your projects and give them the best possible chance of getting the kind of results that you want to see from them, so that would definitely be a strong tip. But what if you're in a situation as a small practice where you don't have any finished projects yet, or you're still waiting 12 months to finish work, or it's just a long way off in the future? Get some sick renders. That's basically the big marketing tip there. And realistically, you would actually be looking to spend a similar amount on a package of renders, so 5 or 6 images with a mix of internal and external. You'd be looking to spend a similar amount to what you would actually spend on a package of finished photos as well. So it is still a really big chunky investment, but it will accelerate what you can do in your marketing so much, because you can take a good package of renders and you can put it up as a project on your website and make it indistinguishable from any other project. And you can market it so easily out into the world. You can run social media ads around it. And the reason that I recommend getting expensive renders done externally versus kind of putting together some stuff on your own is just the marketing potential of those images will be so much stronger if you get that higher end work. And also there's a big time saving involved with not necessarily trying to produce those images yourself. You're going to produce renders and visualization throughout the process to communicate with your clients, but those are different from marketing renders. They're so much more detailed. And I'll show you an example. Since I was highlighting some Western Australian photographers, I wanted to highlight some Western Australian renderers. These are 3 shots from Picture Studio in Perth, and I think they do really nice work. Again, not saying that you have to hire these guys, but this would be the kind of style of marketing render that we're talking about. And this sort of style of imagery, it definitely rubs some architects the wrong way, and I get that. But from the marketing perspective, I think this is what you would want to lean towards to see the best possible results from what you're going to get from your project, and that return on investment that you'll get over that 12 to 18 months where you haven't finished the project yet. These images will do really well for that. The next sort of area that I would strongly recommend this as a tip would actually be sending a monthly-ish email newsletter using MailChimp. I've never met an architect that I haven't had to talk into and convince to send a newsletter. Like, we don't like newsletters, so let's just get that out of the way. They're not everyone's favorite sort of marketing channel, but I think that's partly why they work so well. Email marketing. So I speak to all of my clients and I get so much feedback and data on what is working the best for them in their marketing. And time again, it's the newsletter. And the more I hear that, the more it just makes me want to continue to promote this idea of architects having newsletters. It just works so well. So just a quick overview of the reasons. You own your email list forever. You'd all be seeing how much harder it is to reach people on Instagram. Your email sticks around forever. You're not worrying about an algorithm or anything. Email keeps you top of mind. It's good word of mouth factor. It's all your past clients, past contacts, connections. It can help to stimulate referrals. If you've got somebody that's sitting there in the pipeline, maybe their project's on hold, or they haven't made their mind up yet, they're sitting there for a couple of months, your email is just a helpful nudge to kind of get them to, get back in touch with you. But overall, I also find that the process of planning out what you're going to be sending each month and looking ahead into the future is one of the best reasons to actually sit down and do that planning. And I've had clients comment to me that planning out their email and just thinking about what are we going to be doing over the course of the next year is in and of itself part of what they see as the value of sending out a newsletter. If nothing else, it makes you sit down and plan and be consistent. So it's really important. And then obviously, there's also a time span leading up to people actually reaching out to you, from when they're first interested in your business to when they ultimately contact you. And during that period of time, it's just a more reliable way to get in touch with them. So this is sort of how I would structure a really simple email that should take you under an hour to put together if after you've had a little bit of practice. And this is a client of mine in Melbourne. And the items would usually be some primary item, and this would be a new project, a rendered project, a significant piece of work in progress, a piece of content, an interview, I don't know, something major that's coming out that month. And that would be the thing that you'd be planning ahead into the future. You would then usually follow that up with some really brief project updates that may or may not have images, and then you might chuck on some other news as well. I think the project updates, I find that there's a little bit of a mini tip inside this one, which is that the feedback that I get from my clients is that when they make an effort to mention their clients' projects, the clients, the homeowners, for example, are so stoked to be in their newsletter that they forward it to all of their friends and family pretty much all the time. So it's also another good word of mouth thing to actually sort of check in on your projects as well. But all of that said, a common reaction I kind of get is like, okay, we don't want to send newsletters that are just project, which is definitely true. You should feel free to get creative in any way that you want with your newsletters. You can put in stuff that inspires you, some inspo stuff. I've got a client in the UK that includes a cocktail recipe in each of their monthly newsletters. So things like that can add a whole new dimension to it. I remember Mahali Slocum in Melbourne for a while, they were doing like movie and Netflix reviews in their newsletter. So you can get more creative with it. And if you're out there creating any other kind of content, so writing some articles or trying to do something more in depth, that can go in there as well. But even at a basic level, if you're just giving people updates on what you're up to, the next tip is to actually create a bit of a project case study PDF. And I've kind of put to capture emails. It's not really just about that. It's also about giving a deeper look at the story of a project and how it came about, which is something that an architect will do if you're invited to give a talk, but it's not something that we ever do really in our marketing. So here's the sort of thing I have in mind. This is a PDF by a client of mine in London, and this is kind of skipping through it quite quickly, but looking at the planning, the client's brief, the construction process, like issues that came up on site, the history of the site, all that sort of in-depth stuff. So this is the sort of thing that is really good to do around one or more of your more popular projects, or even if it's just your first project. And this is usually not the type of content that you would put the content itself on a project page, because it kind of gets a bit messy and cluttered, but you would make the PDF available and let people download that. You can also give it to them in person as well. But this is just a really nice way to talk about the work in a bit more depth. So in terms of how you would make that available, if you are interested in collecting emails, generally speaking, collecting emails is really hard. You put a form on your website and it says join our newsletter, and 0.1% of people, literally 0.1% of people will fill that out. So we need to get more creative with it. And I've found from testing lots of different options that promoting on the project pages, an info pack, a case study, a package of plans or drawings is the best way I've found to get emails off your website. And if you do it across a couple of different project pages, they really do start to add up, where, it's not uncommon for small practices to be getting 40, 50, 60 signups a month on their newsletter versus 0 on their newsletter form, right? So creating a piece of content like this works really, really well. And it's also a nice piece of content as well. So it serves sort of multiple purposes. You can also create this type of content around themes or niches if that's what you're interested in pursuing. So that could be a country house, a beach house, a tiny house, whatever sort of project you're into. You can create a starter pack, and this sort of starter pack would basically include some examples, obviously, some overall information about the process. But I think most importantly, it should also include briefing questions to get the person thinking about what they might want to do with their project. So this was an example I worked on with Bauer in Melbourne. And we took this pack and created a really simple little sign up form and ran some Instagram ads to some of these coastal sort of, communities or whatever. And they got absolute tons of signups. They were able to follow up with those people and ask them if they wanted to have like a chat or whatever. And it was really, really productive. So this can be a good thing if there's a specific type of work that you're really interested in getting. Moving on to the media. So a lot of practices approach me and they're like, Dave, how do I get published? What do I do to get published? And, my first question is usually, well, have you been contacting, editors and stuff? Have you been reaching out to publications? And usually the answer is like, no, we just wait for them to contact us. But that really doesn't work very well unless you're a really well-known practice. I think in the latest IBoSP report, they said there's over 12,000 architectural businesses in Australia. And there's honestly about 10 editors in the country, I think, at this point. They're not going to find your work. Well, you shouldn't count on them just discovering your work. You need to be proactive and go and reach out to them. So you want to start by building a bit of a media list. So this would be a spreadsheet where you would track the publications that you think are cool and interesting, both in print, both on digital, social media, and both domestically and internationally. You could also include some more mainstream publications in there. They don't have to all be architecture related, Domain or realestate.com.au or the Financial Review or whatever you want to do. But build this list, start tracking down some contact information for the publications, and then also creating a bit of a system there for tracking each of your projects and who have you actually submitted your project to. And the process that I usually see working quite well is just to slowly work your way through the list. Don't view media as this thing that you just blast out for a week when you get your photos and then you just never touch it again. Just pick off a couple of people at a time and just gradually reach out to them a little bit each month as you slowly work your way down the list. And as you get a no, you move on to the next person. If you get a yes, you then have a conversation with that journalist about, well, how long should I hold off on sending this to other people? So I'm trying to simplify the whole exclusivity issue as much as possible, but that's the process. Look at it as a process that you go through over a long period of time. It's not all one and done, right? Just go gradually. It's helpful to send them a media kit as well. I have another thing on my website, vanityprojects.com/media kit, and you can download this template and then you can, make your own kind of pretty version of it. But I've just pulled together basically all the questions that editors have asked my clients for. So basic project info, photographer info, project description, client brief, all that sort of stuff that you need. So you'll put that together and send it to them. In terms of finding editors' email addresses, if you want to be sneaky about it and go straight to them rather than just using the contact address, I use a website called Anymail Finder, which you can put in their info and it will tell you what their email is, which is really handy. So you want to contact them directly. And in terms of simply reaching out, you just really want to basically have a few elements in your email. There's no one way to do this, but this is one way to do it, I guess. Just mentioning that you've recently completed a project, you think it would be a good fit for them. A couple of, really brief sort of 2-sentence summary of the project. You'd attach a Dropbox folder with the full set of images. I tend to think you might as well send all of them. You would also attach maybe a few key images, and then you would attach your media kit as well and send that to them. Then you can follow up maybe like a week later if you haven't heard from them before moving on. And if it's the first publication you've sent the project to, I would mention that in the email and say that you're the first person to be seeing this, because journalists, editors love exclusivity. So that would be a pretty standard, straightforward way of going about it. But it's about being thorough and making sure you're working your way through the list and you have all those publications on there. Moving on to the website. A tip here, which is going to be obvious to a lot of practices, but I look at lots and lots of architects' websites, and so many of them don't have photos of the people that work there. And I think for a service business, that's a big problem. It makes it really hard for me to connect, the visitor to connect with who's this company, what are they like, what's their kind of vibe, are they sort of whatever. You want to be able to work out whether or not, or just feel that you can kind of trust the people behind the business, I think, at some fundamental level. So, really simple. I'm a big fan of group photos. This is architecture. Architecture on the left, they've done a cute little school photo. Austin Maynard, they're all sort of hanging around the office, pairing that up with some really nice sort of individual shots. And yeah, it's great. It's all you need. But it's just a matter of actually organizing it and making it happen and prioritizing it, because a lot of practices meaning to do it but never get around to it. In terms of group shots, the challenge obviously is that faces come and go over time. Sibling Architecture, when they came on my podcast, they mentioned that they do a team photo shoot just before their Christmas party every year. And it's a way of kind of forcing everyone to do it, even though they don't want to. Then they go and have a party. So I feel like making it a yearly thing that you take and you organize a new group photo if you've got employees is a good thing to do. And just quickly, you want to have everybody on your website, every single person that works at your company. It shouldn't just be the director. You need to include everyone in that. And then on photography, these are examples of architects that have gotten pretty nice photos of their clients in their projects. And I think that's a really big point of difference. If it doesn't take much if your clients are willing to be involved, but it just communicates so well to your clients. And you can use these images in so many ways. They're good for editorial. They're great for your project page, but they're also good if you want to do things like have testimonials from these clients. Having a photo next to a testimonial makes them 100 times more persuasive. So I think it's always a good idea to see if your clients are willing to have some beautiful photos taken of them as well. On websites, SEO, just briefly, there's a couple of real quick tips. SEO is a pretty detailed topic, but there's probably two things that I would really focus on that are going to get you so far without having to do very much at all. So the first thing is make your homepage SEO title. So the homepage title that goes in the address bar, and I'll show you an example in a second, make it more specific to what you do. So what do most people have, without looking at this example too much, but what do most practices have? They just have the name of their business and that's it. Or it says, Zen Architects Home or something like that. That really limits how well your homepage and therefore your website can rank in Google search. So all you need to do is go into your SEO settings for your website, whether it's WordPress or Squarespace, and just change your homepage title to, Jane Cameron Architects, Residential Architects Melbourne. So you want to be touching on what category are you in? Like what's your main focus and where are you? Right, so it's really simple. And so that might be something like, Sustainable Architecture Melbourne. And the reason that this works is because Google really likes to match page titles with search queries. So if I put in Sustainable Architects in Melbourne, it's almost without exception going to give me results almost exclusively that have that keyword or a subtle variation of it in the actual website's title. And as you can see from this example of the first page here, your chances of getting onto the first page for this query, if you don't have that in your page title, are really limited. Even if that's something that is mentioned elsewhere across your website, or it's just so obvious that your focus is sustainable architecture, you're not going to rank if you don't have the page title. So the page title is really key. But what if you're doing multiple types of work? You're doing hospitality and residential and dental clinics. How do we approach that? So in that case, you can't make your homepage do all those things. You wouldn't want to try and get too greedy. You just say Architects Perth. But what you need to actually look to do is create separate pages that live on your website for each of those categories. So this is an example of a practice in London that I've worked with, that they've got this is their multi-residential page or their multi-unit. And it's important to have good copywriting on this page that talks about what this type of client is looking for, what this architect focuses on, what their methodology is, some example projects, a testimonial. So it's all to do with this developer space. And they link to that from a services section of their website, but you could just link to it from somewhere on your about page or even in your footer. It doesn't have to be too prominent on your website if you don't want it to be, but you would be choosing just a handful of other sectors that you're trying to target. And this page, or a page like this, has an extremely good chance of ranking on the first page for that query. So Workplace Architects Perth. If you come along with a Workplace Architects Perth page and put good information on there, I would bet you that you will make it into at least the top few results for that search query. So it's actually quite easy to do. You just need to have the right pages to actually have something for Google to rank you for. They're not just going to make your homepage rank for everything. So that's just a sort of a little thing on SEO. On Instagram, briefly, I think it's a really good idea to promote your Instagram posts. I mentioned earlier in the budget thing about spending some money on Instagram ads. As far as online advertising goes, it's probably still the best bang for your buck. And you'll want to either choose specific posts that you feel you could promote, but if you're not sure which posts or which recent projects you really want to focus on, you can actually go into your Instagram insights and look at all of your recent posts and sort them by reach. And that's going to give you an indication of which post the algorithm sort of favored, that the algorithm promoted more heavily without you doing anything. Those will usually be the posts that will get you the most efficient results from your budget. So I would go with the posts that have had the most reach. If they're a good fit, go with them, but be looking at the top of that list. Before you actually promote your post, go back and edit it, clean it up, change the caption, make it sort of a more general description of the practice and the project, get rid of the hashtags, the tags, all the sort of junk, because you're not going to need them anymore. And you can only edit a post before you promote it, not after. So go in and make those changes before actually promoting it. And then with your targeting, don't do the automatic option. Just select, interests, architecture, pick a location, pick an age group, and then take your budget, make it quite small, but spread it over the longest period of time you can. So usually 30 days. And then you can renew that after 30 days. You can also run multiple campaigns at the same time. So you can pick several posts or a couple, and you can run them side by side, and that will work well. Just one quick thing on Instagram. The algorithm these days is absolutely crazy for video and reels. It's been that way for a little bit of time now, but it's really gone into overdrive. And architects always have this problem of, well, how do we make reels, right? Like, what do we do to actually make video? It becomes this huge, overwhelming thing that you're never really going to get around to doing. So I think a good short-term solution to not having other types of video content is to actually just turn your still images and renders into videos. And I've had clients getting really good results doing this, where they're suddenly having these videos that are just going viral, but they're basically just taking an image and panning across it, or gently zooming into it, or doing any kind of creative thing you can do to turn a still photo into a video. And hopefully this is kind of coming across on the screen share. But this is, this is something that's really simple. So you can make this on your phone using an app called Clips, and there's another one called Zoomy, if you want to do zoomed ones. And it's just a really simple way to kind of start creating a bit more video content without actually having to go out and, hire some expensive filmmaker or something like that. And then finally, to finish things off, this is kind of the last tip. Do something to promote architecture in the community more broadly, even if it doesn't directly lead to a client. So I recently had a guest on the podcast called Amanda Baillieu in the UK, and she had this great idea that architects should be putting aside maybe 10 to 20% of their marketing budget just for activities that are about, engaging with the public, talking about what architects do, creating content that's educational, that tells the story about, how these projects come about. And so I think that's a really important thing to do. And some of the best results that my clients have seen have come from things where they weren't actually out there trying to get a client. They were just trying to do something like this. And so some examples of things that you can do, just a few things that I've had clients do at various stages. Organizing a group tour for one of your projects during construction is always really popular. You can just post that open. You can set up a registration page, put it out there, and you'll find that it fills up straight away with people that want to come and see your work. You can run an open house, obviously, or participate in the Open House Perth program. You can give a talk or run a workshop in your studio and invite the public in to have a chat. Even something simple like building a calculator, or maybe not so simple, but building some sort of calculator to help people estimate things like construction costs is a really nice thing to do. Offering quick Zoom consultations to raise money for charity. I've had clients that have really enjoyed doing that over the last couple of years. And even this kind of crazy example, one of my clients in London actually rented a stall at a farmer's market. And he basically just stood there in the cold, chatting to people And at first he felt a bit embarrassed, but he said he spoke to about 40 people that day, and they absolutely loved that he was just turning up there to chat to them. And it did end up leading to some really fantastic project opportunities. So I'm not suggesting you go out there and book a farmer's market stall just to pick up work by any means, but it's this idea of doing something different, being out there more visible in the public as well, and being kind of more face to face with your local community, I think is just a really important thing for architects to be doing, even if you're a small practice, but especially if you're also medium or large. So that was it, guys. I think we did it 31 minutes. So due to the technical limitations of me zooming in, I'm not going to be able to do any Q&A because I can't hear or see any of you. But you're going to have a great afternoon with the panel and the other speakers. But if you want to learn a little bit more about me, you can go to vanityprojects.com and you can check out some of the different things that I do. And there's lots of things like calculators and checklists and all that sort of stuff on the website. And if you've got any questions about anything I brought up today or anything else, you can email me at dave@vanityprojects.com.